I'm Matt Cortman. Welcome to our weekly Zoom Ivory-billed Woodpecker presentation. Tonight's going to be a fun one. It's going to be on sightings. You'll get to judge for yourself whether or not those of us who report sightings are crazy, incompetent, or lying. I'll tell you first of all, about identifying an ivory-billed woodpecker. It's actually fairly easy in the wild. And then I'll give my sightings. My two sightings, I'll describe them. And then Thomas Mathieu is one of our search partners. He'll describe his very recent sighting of an ivory-bill. And then finally, Mathieu Dell will let us know about his sighting in 2012. But we're thrilled to have you. I'm glad our merry band is growing. And with that, we'll launch into our slides. We always have to show this photo. It's so beautiful. This is from the 1935 Cornell expedition into the Singer Tract in northeast Louisiana. The photos were later colorized, and then Mike Brown, who's a friend and an ivory-billed person, really sharpened it up. So just a magnificent photo of the male ivory-billed woodpecker. We have two organizations. One is the Louisiana Wild, and that's more of it's about establishing relationships throughout the state and engaging in nature education. Ideas, the thing that makes you want to howl at the moon. And then the Ivory-bill specific organization, Mission Ivory-bill. Honestly, Lauren and I had intended to launch that in January of 2022, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has moved up our plans with the announcement, the Extinction proposal announcement. So I apologize. Mostly my head's in the woods. So we're getting better at this, and Lauren's doing all the hard work. So the production quality may be a little difficult at times, but we're thrilled to have you. So the reason we're here, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service had the extinction announcement on September 29 of 2021. And I think it's an important issue. If the ivory-bill is declared extinct, we deal here with hunters mostly, and I've had 3 of them tell me, so if the ivory-bill is declared extinct, can we shoot ivory-bills? Honestly, I'm not sure the answer to that question. Some people think that the ivory-bill will lose its legal protection. Anyway, I think it would be catastrophic if the Fish and Wildlife Service actually does declare the bird extinct. And this is typical of the reporting. It says the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has removed 23 species from those protected under the Endangered Species Act. First of all, that's not true. The service has proposed that they be declared extinct. And again, we have until November 29 to submit comments. And we're hopeful that Fish and Wildlife Service, well, at least what we're really shooting for is to grant the ivory-bill a stay of execution so that they'll postpone any declaration for at least 3 and hopefully 5 years. And the other part of the sentence, that because they have not been seen in the wild for decades, meaning they're most likely extinct, they absolutely have been seen in the wild many times over the last decades, and that's what we're here to tell you about. So, in taking a look at the extinction narrative, and I use that word because I think most of this is just narrative. There's so many misstatements, but it's that there have been 0 sightings since 2005, and this comes from a National Geographic article. And again, not to pick on National Geographic, I'm mostly very impressed. I just think this reporting is not very good. But here we are 16 years later, and nobody has seen an ivory-billed woodpecker since those initial reports. And that's a reference to the Arkansas sightings, which ended putatively in 2005. So the thing right off the bat that is such a misstatement of fact is Dr. Jeff Hill from Auburn in 2006 had sightings of ivory-bills in Northwest Florida. And Dr. Jeff Hill won the 2014 Brewster Medal. The Brewster Award is the highest award in ornithology, so it's not as if Jeff Hill is some kind of incompetent person. And also, mostly those behind the extinction narrative tend to argue from authority or appeal to authority, and it makes you wonder why they are appealing. They're leading with lesser authority. So John Fitzpatrick, another Brewster Medal winner, he's against the extinction announcement. So is Jeff Hill. I don't know of any Brewster Award winners who are for the Extinction Declaration about the Ivory-bill. So I did want to say one other thing about Jeff. Jeff's findings weren't obscure. They were published by, in a great book of his called The Ivory-bill Hunters, published by Oxford University Press. The fact that Fish and Wildlife Service didn't seem to consult any of Jeff's work is troubling. But again, this is typical of the reporting also. So you'll see further, it says their press release states that the last confirmed sighting was in 1944, which means that they have now disowned the 2004 and 5 sightings from eastern Arkansas. And that's a reference to the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, who absolutely in 2005 in their press release accepted the sightings in eastern Arkansas. There were 7 of them. And there's no explanation as to why all these many years later they've decided that those sightings weren't in fact true. It's hard really to, again, to piece together the narrative. Also, this 1944 last confirmed sighting, I don't know why that's considered confirmed, because it was simply Don Eckelberry, who was an artist commissioned by the National Audubon Society, who did pen and ink drawings of the ivory-bill, but it's not as if he had a photograph. So there's an article in 1972 from New York Times, which says the last accepted sighting was in the early 1950s by Samuel Grimes in Western Florida. So again, where these narratives come from, I don't really know, but they're not based on data. I just wanted to show you briefly the other possibilities for ivory-billed woodpecker. And this is from great artwork done by David Sibley, and this was U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So while I'm going to be critical of their announcement, I'm certainly overall super impressed with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And in general, they do a great job. I just disagree with them on this. So here you can see the identifying marks of the ivory-bill. Basically, in the United States, we have 2 large woodpeckers. They got both crow size. The ivory-bill is slightly larger, both excuse me, in length and in wingspan than the pileated woodpecker, but it's a much more massive bird. And then looking at it, the key thing in flight is that the ivory-bill, the trailing edge of both the upper wing and the lower wing are white. And I'll show you some comparison videos later to show that it's really the flight pattern that really is arresting. And I would say it's another insulting thing to people who have observed pileateds, right? That's the other big woodpecker. And to think that an experienced observer would confuse a flying ivory-bill with a pileated, in my opinion, is just silly. The ivory-bill has a flight profile of an arrow, and the pileated, as you'll see, is more rows. It's like a butterfly. So that's the comparison chart. One thing that is not in the comparison chart, which I find in North Louisiana, if I get a report, I'm more inclined to think if they're a hunter, they might, I don't think anybody who's been in our woods for a long time has seen dozens or hundreds of pileated woodpeckers would confuse that bird for the ivory-bill. I do think it's possible to confuse the black-bellied whistling duck on the left for the ivory-bill, particularly because it's relatively new to our area here in North Louisiana, so hunters wouldn't be that familiar with them. And even though their trailing edge of the wing, as you'll see, is not white, it is when it flies, it's just a bold white pattern on the upper wing. And not surprisingly, as I mentioned before, the ivory-bill flies straight. It's described, and it's true that when I've seen it, it looks like a pintail coming through the woods. And so the black-bellied whistling duck, not surprisingly, flies straight and powerfully like a duck. So I think that's a more likely confusion than the pileated woodpecker. Excuse me, all for my sickness. When the bird is perched, because of of course, the back is really the folded wings, there's no doubt about that the ivory-bill has a pattern that's completely different from the pileated. The pileated has an all black, apparent black. Again, that's the wings that are folded. Now, you could get confused with a red-headed woodpecker, which is half the size of the ivory-bill, and obviously the pattern on the head is much different. but the red-headed does superficially look like the ivory-bill. And so we're going to go through, and I just want to, y'all have seen this before. So here is the amazing movie footage that Cornell took in the Singer Tract in 1935 of ivory-billed woodpeckers. And again, bear with me, those of you who've been here before, you've seen it before, but it's hard not to watch this. So that's the male coming out. You can see a little red in the crest. So the female has a black crest, the male has a red crest. Otherwise, they look familiar, similar. The other difference is the female's crest is a little recurved, like Cindy Lou Who. It comes up. Just magnificent creatures. But you see the extensive white on the back. Again, that's its folded wings. And behaviorally, I've never seen a perched ivory-bill, but they're described as moving back and forth much more vigorously. And that's the cavity that's 43 feet up in the air. And you see the female, that's the Cindy Lou Who recurved crest. Just amazing. If we find the cavity, which is really our sole quest, we'll be able to get good photos with cell phones. So that's not really the issue. The issue is when the bird is flying. So this is amazing footage from Mexico. The ivory-billed woodpecker is a member of the Campephalus genus. It's Campephalus principalis. Its close relative, the imperial woodpecker of Mexico, the largest woodpecker in the world, ivory-bill's the third. And the imperial could be extinct. But this is from 1956, Dr. William Rain, who was a dentist. And this came after, it was publicized by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology after the Arkansas kerfuffle. So in my opinion, I think this would have settled it, though we're not really here to relitigate what happened in Arkansas. I just wanted to show you that in terms of flight style and flight and feathers on the wing, there's a slight difference in the plumage for the imperial. Its lateral, its stripes don't go all the way to the head, but other than that, it looks just like an ivory-bill. So what I wanted to impress upon y'all is to look at the imperial in flight, which we'll see, and then we'll compare that with a pileated woodpecker, and then we'll go back and forth one more time. So the imperial woodpecker of Mexico was the specialist of the pines in the mountains of the Sierra Madre, and which is somewhat interesting about the ivory-bill. The issue is, was the ivory-bill, or is the ivory-bill limited to bottomland hardwoods? And watch this flight. You'll see it looks white the whole way through on the wing. And again, you know, the sightings are so brief usually. That's what you really have to focus on. So I'll talk about my second sighting. When I'd heard the birds and I anticipated seeing them, I looked exclusively at the trailing edge of the wing the whole way. So, but again, when the bird flies, I just want you to note the type of flight and that you can see a steady stream of white. And if you look closely, you'll see that the white is on the trailing edge of the wing. The point of the story is that the birds are very easy to distinguish in the field, that is an ivory-bill from a pileated. And again, if they're perched, you see that big white saddle, there's no doubt about it. But look how strong that is, and you can see the white on the trailing edge. And again, it's more white, 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 whereas the pileated, which we'll get to next. This is taken by my friend Mike Collins. I highly recommend his work at fishpro.com, Mike Collins. So this is a video that Mike took of the pileated woodpecker in the Pearl River swamp. Again, this is our common big woodpecker, and this is what they say that people are confusing ivory-bills for. And you'll see once the bird gets in cruise in particular, it rose with big, broad wings through the air. So it's I would call that a lazy flight as opposed to the very dynamic waterfowl-like flight, duck-like flight of the ivory-bill. And I do think this is so important. We'll go back and take a look at the imperial and the pileated. But you don't see white the whole time. So We'll go back one more time to the imperial. Again, this is, I haven't seen Ivorybills perched, but again, flying, this is exactly what they look like. There have been expeditions looking for the imperial without success. Then I'm agnostic as to whether the imperial is extinct or not. And again, when it flies away, you'll see that it's white, white, white. And you can see that both imperials have a recurved crest, both the male and the female, that's more pronounced in the female. That's fun when you can see her in silhouette. Again, that sort of Cindy Lou look. Cindy Lou Who? That's a scientific term. And again, look at the back of the wings, the trailing edge. Totally different flight pattern from pileated, which we'll watch one more time. And see how the pileated, the back is all black, and the folded wings. So if you see them perched, there's no way to confuse them. So the pileated does have a little white on the top part of the wing, but it's not very much. It's the bottom of the wing is extensively white. So that's why, to me, it looks more of a flash of black, white, black. You can see a little white on the upper wing, but you can see the trailing edge is black, black, black. And again, the way it, to me, loafs through the air is totally different from the way the Campephalus species fly. And again, the Ivorybills, Campephalus principalis. So I just wanted to emphasize how it's actually a pretty easy identification to separate these two in in real life. So I wanted to talk about my 2019 sightings. I had two of them on February 18 of 2019. I don't know if this is going to come across very well, but this is from my Gaia, GAIA.com, I think, app, which I highly recommend. So each of those red pins, not each of them is an Ivorybill sighting, but they're super helpful for navigating through the woods. So I don't know if you can see it. On the left is A, I wrote in blue, and on the B on the right, and those two, so the centers of the left cluster and then the right cluster. And the distance between them was about 1.3 miles. That's another great thing about Gaia, is you can really measure the distance as well. So going to the February 18th sighting, I want to get to this quickly. So on that day, I was walking with a great birder named Marky Bird Girl. We had heard Ivorybills in the morning making Kent calls, and then on the way back, because we'd been delayed, we essentially had given up for the day, and we were walking through a pine forest, which was next to the bottomland hardwoods. And again, that's always the issue, where the Ivorybills just in the bottomland hardwoods, or could they be in pines also? Honestly, at the time, I was more of the just bottomland hardwood school. I now don't think that. I don't think Ivorybills are limited to any particular forest regime. They could be in pine woods. And what I'm going to tell you is that I saw one. The first one I saw was in the pine woods, just off the margin of the bottomland hardwoods. So it was a little upland from the bottomland hardwoods, but in Louisiana, where this was, it was only about an elevation of, there was a topo map of 8 feet from the bottomlands to the uplands of the pine. But what happened on that day was we were, Marky and I, I thought the day was over, and we were walking back through pine trees, and Marky had followed the protocol perfectly, which was to be completely quiet. And when we heard the Ivorybill earlier in the morning, we had done the special forces kind of hand signals and she was quiet as a church mouse. All right, so here comes Matt, and because Marky's an excellent photographer, I always made sure that Marky and I were walking abreast so that she would see what I saw. But now, since I thought the day was over, I was yakking up a storm, and we were walking through the woods, and Marky was about 20 yards behind me in trail. When the bottom cursor, the bottom pin, is where I saw the bird, which was at the top right pin. And what I saw, I didn't initially recognize as a bird. It was flying so straight and so low, I thought it was mechanical. And I measured the distances. Again, this is a great guy. I observed it about 55 yards away at my 1:30, almost 2 o'clock. And as it started closer to me, I realized it was a bird. Here I had told Marky to be quiet. And that was based on advice from friends in the Arkansas search. So here, cool, calm, and collected Matt, as the object got closer to me from the 55 yards away, I realized it was a bird. So I literally said, "Whoa, big bird." And just as I said that, its closest point was 14 yards away. And it zoomed up into the tree. And as it was zooming, I said, "Magpie," because it looked like to me, even though I was very familiar with all the specimens of Ivorybills, I'd never seen an Ivorybill flying, of course. I'd gone to college in California and was quite familiar with black-billed magpies. So the bird was flying very low. It was only 3 feet off the forest floor and very straight. And so my view of the bird was from above. And so it looked to me like a magpie because it was an explosion of black and white on the top. There was no red in the crest, so that's why I knew it was a female. And it had an exceptionally long tail. It was much longer than you would think based on the specimens. And I'll get into that at some other time. But my belief is that the Ivorybill perhaps can manipulate its tail in flight to give it more drag. So through the auspices and total talent of the generous Dean Hurleman, I was able to reenact the photo. This is about the bird as it came about halfway to me. And again, this is a male that Dean made, and the one I saw was a female. And it got, again, 14 yards away, very close. It was just amazing. So that was on February 18, and honestly, it took my brain a long time not a long time. My brain didn't really snap into gear until the bird was already flying up. So that was more what I would call a limbic, Limbic sighting. It was more my body responded to it. That was totally different from I was blessed the next month, again, about a mile and a third away to the southeast, on March 10. So you see these 3 pins are actually 4, but just the top pin and then the bottom, the 2 that are clustered. So of those 3, the bottom one was where I first heard 2 birds making the same kent calls that I'd recorded before. So that's where I was very excited. But I was in a holly thicket, and so I walked through. I couldn't see where the birds were making the call, so I walked towards the sound, and I cleared the thicket. And so when I cleared I heard them from about 33 yards away. And when I cleared them, the holly thicket, I was 24 yards away from the birds, who were flying straight perpendicular to me as you're looking at it, from the left to the right, which would have been the west to the east. And the point I have it marked was when they flew over a tree stub that probably pileated had knocked out. But so I observed those birds. They were low again, but not. I think I had flushed them from trees to the left of where I was looking, and they were already in escape flight, and they were about 20 feet in the air, and they were rising. I was able to observe them for a good 80 yards because they followed the course of a creek to the east, to the right. So I observed them for about 6 seconds. And then I did the math, and that actually works out to Mike Collins, again, the guy I mentioned before. I say guy, the PhD in mathematics, who's done a great job in calculating. He has a fly under video And he's done the math to show the bird was flying about 34 miles an hour, and that actually worked out to the both of my sightings. This one's, again, was about 6 seconds. I saw all the field marks. It was very close to the bird. There's no doubt in my mind. And those two birds are on my life list. Now, they were perpendicular to me, and all I could see is the one in front. The closer one had a black crest, so that was a female, and I assumed the one behind it was a male. So I'm pretty confident that was a pair of Ivory-bills from the way they were behaving. We'll just hold the questions to the end about mine and think about them, as I wanted to introduce Thomas Mathieu. And Thomas, if you want to tell your sighting and how you and I got together, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect, good. This is my first time ever speaking on one of these things, so I'm glad I've got it set up right. The first thing I wanted to do was just to let everyone know exactly how hard Matt is truly working on this, and to really give him my thanks and extend some appreciation, because he really, really pours his heart and soul into this.
Thanks.
And I'm really glad that we got linked up. I'm Thomas Mathieu, and this is my mother, Tracy, right here. She was driving the vehicle on the day that I had my sighting. This was on September 6th. And Mom and I decided that we were going to go scout around and see if we could find a place, a likely place to do some dove hunting. And we went down to our farm, didn't see any. And as we were driving around, pretty much completely at random, we ended up in the 𝗥𝗘𝗔𝗟𝗟𝗬 National Wildlife Refuge. Our family has a farm on the northern end of the refuge, and that's where we initially tried our luck. But once we got in the car and had been driving for a while, the woods were pretty thick on our left and right on this particular section of road that we were in. And all of a sudden, from right to left in front of me at about 15 yards, I saw this huge bird. And my first thought, based on its flight pattern, I first caught a glimpse of it out of the passenger window. My first thought was that it had to be a pintail or maybe a wood duck, because of the way it was flying, because it had such a it had such a direct, such powerful wing beats. And then, this was probably 25 yards in front of the car, like I said, about 15 feet off the ground. And as it passed in front of the A-pillar of the vehicle and got into the windscreen proper, that's when I realized that it was nothing I had ever seen before. I saw the crest. I saw the massive yellow eye. It was close enough for me to get a good look at all the field markings. And when it disappeared into the woods on my left, there was a big opening in the trees, and I was able to observe it for probably 40 or 50 yards as it flew into the trees before the foliage got so thick that it disappeared. But I clearly saw the white on the back of its wings, and I was completely stunned and in shock. I think, like Matt said, he said, "Whoa, big bird." I think that the only thing I said was, "Good God, did you see that?" And as I turned and looked at my mom, and unfortunately, she did not. She was looking at a vehicle that was coming at us, and we had met on the road several times that day. It had her distracted, and somehow this huge woodpecker was able to fly in front of our vehicle. And she did not catch a glimpse of it, but I did. And about 30, the first thing that she did was said, "Oh my God, you got to drop a pin if that's what you really think you saw." And I was so flummoxed, just completely flabbergasted. I had not thought to do anything. I was just completely in shock, just looking at the place in the woods where the thing had disappeared, hoping that it would just magically reappear somehow. And I dropped the pin, and we kept going. And about 30 yards later, a pileated flew out of the woods from left to right and landed from the same direction that the ivory-bill had just disappeared. And it landed on a tree about 35 yards in front of us. And Mom said, "Is that what you saw?" And looking at it, I was utterly convinced in that moment. You're always going to have a little bit of you're always going to have a little bit of niggling doubt when you see something that's kind of like seeing a UFO or a ghost or Bigfoot. You know, you just kind of wonder if maybe your eyes weren't playing tricks on you. But no, the minute I saw that pileated, I realized that its flight pattern was completely different. It didn't have any of the white on it. It was substantially smaller, actually, I would say. That I've hunted. I'm 30 years old now. My dad's had me out there in those woods since I was about 5 or 6, and a pair of pileateds actually nest about 35 yards from the deer stand that I hunt in all the time, and I've watched them for years. I'm pretty familiar with the pileated, and I was taken aback by the size in comparison to the ivory-bill that had just flown in front of the car. The pileated was like the size of a small crow, but that ivory-bill was more the size of like a large raven or something, and like Mason Spencer said in his original account, they're big birds, they're big, they're fast, and they fly through the woods like pintail ducks. That's what he said, and that's exactly what this thing flew like. I mean, I've never seen a woodpecker ever fly anything like this, and it was plainly a woodpecker. It was a male. I saw the red on the crest, so I'm certain that it was a male.
Thomas, did you ever had an experience in all your years in the Tinsel where you thought another bird might be an ivory-billed woodpecker?
Not for a single second. I've never seen anything, and I have never heard anything that sounds anything like what you and I have heard in those woods since I had my sighting.
Yeah. And I'll just follow up. So, and I do have to, this is such Lauren and I are so blessed. And I see that John Williams is here, and I just wanted to shout out to John. So, long story short, that's a horrible phrase when it comes from an ex-lawyer. I had given a talk at the Red River National Wildlife Refuge, and here's the Reader's Digest version. It had been reported by the local NPR station, so I was Googling the report on it because they did a good job of recording my recordings. So, but I hadn't kept a file of things that had been written about me. So I Googled that, and to my surprise, I discovered on Tiger Droppings, this is an LSU cap. So on Tiger Droppings, which is an LSU sports fan page, I didn't even know there was an outdoor section. So on there, someone had a thread about, hey, somebody's offering a $12,000 reward. They say they've seen ivory-billed woodpeckers. And so, of course, it was our reward poster. And it was fun because it was a snapshot of basically Louisiana hunters, what they think. I would say 15% were very hostile to the idea that ivory-bills still persisted. 30% either had a direct experience with ivory-bills or they believed someone who had said it, who had seen them, and then the rest were in the middle. So it was nice for that. And there, I engaged somewhat, went back and forth. And then what I was going to say is my friend John Williams later went back and said, because I think my handle was Ivorybill Matt, I just engaged in that, and it was polite but firm. And John said something entered the fray and said, oh, well, I've worked with that person. His name is Matt Cortman. And then, Thomas, if you want to say how you got to me.
Yeah, I've just always been interested in ivorybills, despite never having seen anything that made me think it was one. My dad has always told me that when he was a little boy back in the 1960s, when he would hunt back there with his great-grandfather, he thinks that he may have seen a pair on a tree. So that's always stuck with me, and I've always been curious in the back of my mind if the birds were possibly still out there, and if they were still out there, where they might possibly be. And so when I saw that thread on the outdoor board, I'm an LSU fan as well, and I frequent Tiger Droppings also, but I look at the outdoor board more than I look at the sports sections these days. And when I saw that post, I just filed it away in the back of my mind, never thinking that I would ever have cause to actually reach out and contact Matt. And sure enough, when I saw it, I didn't really know who to report the sighting to. I didn't think to call the Game and Fish because I didn't really want anyone to think I was crazy, but I remembered that post, and I went and used the search function and resurrected the thread and went through it. and found where someone had posted Matt's full name. And from there, I was able to find him on Facebook. But it was really just complete random chance that I happened to be browsing the board that day and saw Matt's post. And not only that, but I remembered it all that time later. And the rest is history.
Yeah. And to be clear, so Tensas River National Wildlife is the full name. That is the home of the Singer Tract. So the last universally accepted sighting, and that's not even, in 1944, was in the Singer Tract, and that's where Thomas and I are on this bird. I've heard the bird twice, and Thomas has some good recordings of double knocks. At this point, we are, because of canopy leaf out, you don't want to have, excuse me, too much of a footprint. You worry about chasing the bird away, particularly when there's not much chance of getting a good clear photo, because again, canopy leaf out, the birds just go up into the leaves, and so they're hard to find. So I've mentioned that we'll be starting searches globally when deer season ends in Louisiana on February 1st. And if you want to come help Thomas and me and whoever wants to come along, we've already done this with a couple of friends, and we've had great success. So our strategy is to put us roughly a quarter mile apart from each other on a line before first light, and here, see if we can triangulate the location of the bird. We've had success with that, and I've reached out to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and haven't had any response, but that's the state of that, and we'll keep monitoring. Who knows? Maybe in 2 weeks we'll have the photo. And again, if you want to come search with us, let me know. So Mike asks what state and county is Thomas is sighting. All we'll say is it's in Tensas River National Wildlife Refuge for now. And the reason we're being a little coy, it's southwest of Tallulah, Louisiana, and southeast of Delhi, Louisiana. But contact me personally. It's also, Judy asked when this happened. That was September 6th, and we've had contact with a bird several times since then. Thomas had, and I want to get through fairly quickly, but Thomas had, I'll let you say what you had an intriguing sighting if you want to describe that incident. So just for the audience, we've gone back several times, and half of the time we've gone back, we've either heard it or Thomas is about to describe a possible sighting.
Yeah, so on the 26th, Matt and I were kind of working with those same basic search parameters that he kind of just explained, kind of setting up on a line and trying to see if we couldn't intercept him or, have just luck of the draw, have him at least be fairly close to us when we set up, because the sound of the double knocks carries quite a ways through the woods. So you don't have to be just right on top of them in order to have some success in kind of triangulating them. And I was sitting there, I think it was about 9:45 in the morning, and this is the incident actually that prompted me to beg my father for a GoPro to help out in this search, because I really didn't expect to see the bird again. I wanted to more than anything in the world, but I know how unlikely it is. It's like a lightning strike, and I just was not that confident that he would just come fly right by me again. But at about 9:45 in the morning, I heard a bird, a big bird, winging its way through the trees towards me, and it had a tree directly in between me and it. And when it was flying pretty low, it was flying about probably 5 or 10 feet off the ground. The only real glimpse of this thing that I got were its wingtips, as the wings flared out on either side of the tree. And you could see the tips of the wings zoom up the trunk. Probably, like I said, the bird was probably 5, 10 feet off the ground. And by the time he perched in that tree, I would estimate probably 55 feet off the ground. He had a real steep upward swooping light as he alighted, on the side of the tree. But he alighted on the side of the tree that faced directly away from me. These things almost seem to have like a supernatural knack for avoiding the human eye. And so he lit right there, and I had read part of Jim Tanner's thesis, where he said that the most successful method that he used for finding them was to wait until he heard one and then take off sprinting through the woods after it. So I didn't sprint, but I made up my mind that I was going to try to move on the bird and get a photo of it. And so I was kind of quietly slipping my way towards him. He was about 50 or maybe 75 yards away through the woods. And I started slipping towards him. And when I did, I made it about 15 yards, and off the backside of that tree at about 55 or 60 feet up, this bird just jumped off the back of this tree, and it made a sound like a turkey's escape flight. If you've ever heard that, anyone that have real stiff wings, and it can actually really frighten you early in the morning, especially if you're not expecting it. But that's what this sounded like. It sounded like a turkey or something. Like a chicken, something with real stiff wooden sounding wings. And it just banked off the tree and made a climbing turn and probably turned about 85 degrees and flew off through the trees straight away from me. And I never, because of the way that the light was at the time and the fact that it was a little bit overcast, I was kind of looking right at a cloud that had the sun behind it. I didn't get any field marks on the second sighting. The sound of the wings and the fact that I had heard the knocking come right before that makes me almost certain that it was the same Ivory-billed, but I couldn't see any color on it the second time around, just like I said, because of the color of the sky and everything. And it just, I could not make a definitive assertion that second bird was it. But based on the wing noise, based on the flight profile, and based on how it alighted on the tree and the speed, I would really lean towards it probably being the same bird. Because, like I said, I've watched pileateds all my life, and two of them live in the cedar tree right next to my deer stand. I've spent a lot of time looking at them. And they don't ever make noise. Their wings don't make noise. I've heard those birds come and go, light on those trees hundreds of times in my life, and their wings don't make any sound. And this thing was loud. I mean, really loud.
Yeah, Thomas, I wanted to jump in and say, I think it's very significant. Mike Collins has done a great job. And with his fly under video, if you do the math, it's the Ivory-bill flies at about 34 miles an hour. Excuse me. And Brett Tobolsky, who's an expert on this, has published some data which shows that the pileated flies, and this is an approximation, but about 20 miles an hour. And this is one of the few, what I would say are field marks that we've discovered with the Ivory-bill, and the reports we get of them flying so low frequently. What Thomas described with the second thing, with the lighting bird, makes sense because the Ivory-bill has long, thin wings, and the speed with which it flies through the forest means it has to bleed off that kinetic energy to fly up to slow down enough. So that's very consistent with many reports we've had with the Ivory-bill. And I got a perfect photo of a pileated doing the exact opposite. The pileated has big boat paddle wings, and it has enough wing aspect ratio that it can slow itself down and it can fly directly onto a tree, whereas an Ivory-bill couldn't. And Thomas, I wanted to sum up with you because we want to get to Mathieu Dell, who's here, but I just wanted to say, the next day, I interviewed Tracy, Thomas's mother, and as an ex-lawyer, when Tracy said how emotional Thomas was about the issue, that's when I had no doubt from your description that you'd seen an Ivory-billed woodpecker, but when your mother confirmed how emotional you were about it, that was the same way I was when I saw it the first time. Again, it's
shocking.
Quite an experience, yeah, really shocking. So Thomas, thanks so much. And if Mike Vanette, excuse me, made a good point when he said about it being cooler, it's easier to search now. The times that Thomas and I have encountered this bird, it was hot and humid, and it's amazing just the change in Louisiana just from September to now, 1st of November, how much further sound carries when it's cold. So who knows with the conditions. That's one of my frustrations with the Ivory-bill is people say they know so much more than they do. It's really difficult to tell how far those sounds would go through the woods given all the variations. But Thomas, thanks, and stick around for questions. I'm now going to go to, if Matthew Dell is here, he wanted to Matthew, can you unmute yourself and introduce
I
yourself?
just did.
Oh,
Is it
good.
working?
Hey, Matthew.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. You want to describe your experience with the Ivorybill?
Sure. I was hunting with my father. We had hunted along the Pearl River Wildlife Management Area, an area called English Bayou. We'd been hunting there for several years. And that year, there had been some flooding in the area, and a blockage of trees had been pushed out, and so we could go farther up English Bayou than we'd ever been. And so we took advantage of that opportunity to go a little farther, and we had normally hunted the south side, the left side as you're approaching, and going upstream. So we'd gone to the right side this time because we found a little area that was strong enough, high enough, dry enough to walk on the right side. We'd never really hunted the right side before, and being farther upstream than we'd been before. My father went upstream, and I was going to go a little bit downstream, and I had stopped after getting out of the boat. I was watching to see where my father went, and I waited, and I was going to let a little more light go to kind of choose my spot. And then as I started to walk, I hadn't moved yet. I started to walk. I noticed something out of my left side, which would have been kind of towards my father, more like a 45 between us. That's kind of an imperfect measurement, but it'd give you a rough idea. So 45-degree left, I saw something large coming out from the sky area, and it was dropping downward towards me, and it was coming right towards me. And as it came below the canopy where I could see it a little more clearly, it was coming, like I said, at a downward angle. A couple things struck me. One is that it looked a little bit like a pileated in its profile, in its silhouette. But what was really odd about that is I'm very familiar with pileated, and it was no red, none on its head. And as it turned and flared, I saw white trailing wings. And it came down underneath the vegetative canopy into sort of that clear spot between the ground and the tree vegetation. And it flared and came upward, and the trailing wings were very, very distinct. I mean, it was obvious. If you go back to that set of photos that you showed earlier, right at the beginning of this, and you'll see the third from the left on the top with the white trailing wings. That's what those wings look like. It was like you dipped the bird's wings into a bucket of white paint and just the trailing end. It was very distinct. It was obvious. I'd never seen anything like this before. So the things that struck me was there was no red on this bird's head, which is incredibly peculiar. The trailing wing white was very peculiar. And then the fact that it approached in an upward angle to bleed off its speed, and it went into a sycamore tree on my right. And as it did that, it was obviously slowing to stop, which is contrary. Now, many years we lived in a house in Tioga, Louisiana, and we had a mated pair of pileated that lived in the backyard, and it raised 3 young. We saw those birds every day. When a pileated goes to land, it just goes and lands, and it does not bleed speed this way. It's a very different flight pattern. And so I have to reiterate the 3 things that I saw. No red on the head whatsoever, white trailing wings, and its angle of approach to land. And I didn't actually see the landing. I saw it approaching, and it was like it was on the verge of it, but it went into the vegetation, so I could no longer see it. So I did not see the actual landing, but it was a sycamore tree that it went into. So anyway, that was my experience. Now, I knew that the ivory-billed existed, but I always associated ivory-billed with a red head. And I also had seen pictures of the ivory-billed that look a little different than what I saw. If you look at the poster over your right shoulder, you'll see how it's got a little white in the center, and you've got and then the other one, the male, you see the trailing wing on the male. You know, I had associated those, but that was not what I saw, and I didn't expect to see it. I got to tell you, my parents always said it's extinct. You know, it's like seeing you'll see Bigfoot before you see an ivory-billed. So I didn't really have any expectation of seeing this bird I was shocked. As you described being in awe, I sat there with my mouth open. I was completely shocked. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I was like, well, but Ivory-bills are supposed to have red heads. And I didn't realize that the female would have a black head. So when after doing the hunting, I got together with my father and he described what I saw, and he had his shocked look on his face. He said, okay. We went back to our camp afterwards, and he went and dug out a folder full of papers, and he had pictures in there. And he showed me a couple of pictures. I could tell he was setting me up to show me what he really wanted to show me. And he finally turned one picture over, and I looked at it and I said, that's exactly what I saw. It was a female Ivory-billed woodpecker was what he had the diagram of. And so that was my experience, and so it led me to actually start carrying a camera around, and I've become something of a bird photographer, and I do a bunch of things with eBird, and then I also volunteer with hummingbirds. But I spend a lot of time taking pictures now because I didn't think anybody would ever believe me. And I also had another issue was I didn't want to tell anybody because I thought it was better for the bird not to say anything. And so I just shut up. And I said, the best thing I can do with the bird is not tell a soul, because I don't want a bunch of people who, just start charging out there and looking and disturbing the bird, because the bird is obviously shy of humans. So I thought it was better to just shut up. But years later, there was another reason. I looked up the area, and it was actually when all the Alabama and Arkansas activities were going on. My dad sent me a link, and I did some web searches, and I came up with Michael Collins' experience, and I was shocked to see that what he described was right there at English Bayou, right where I had seen it. And this was November 24th of 2012, and apparently Collins had experiences before and after that time and worked that area. So it was shocking to me that somebody else actually knew what I thought I was the only one who knew. So it was interesting. But anyway, that was my experience.
Mathieu,
and I'm not.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh,
No, go ahead.
I hope you don't mind. May I say your profession from which you're retired?
I was a criminal investigator. I worked for the U.S. Marshal Service for 30 years. So I'm not, and I did a lot of work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife on enforcement programs and things. So I was a pretty detail-oriented person, and I'm not somebody who's just, I'm not quoting saying that I saw a Bigfoot or something here. I served the federal courts for 30 years.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that you're a trained observer and probably have the disposition not to get too emotional. But again, you described what both Thomas and I did, which was basically our jaws, hit the floor. And
it was a shocking moment for me. I'm not a real emotional person. I don't rattle easily, but it was. I really just stood there for the longest time, and at the moment after it happened, I was like, do I approach and try to go under there and see, or do I just wait here and hope that it moves and I see it some more? And I really froze for a moment there because I really had no idea. There's no basis for understanding this because I don't know this bird's behavior. And
right.
it's not like hunting people. If it people, I would have charged. If it or certain types of birds, I would have done this or that. But I had no basis to make a decision. And so I really sat there and I kind of froze for a moment, and then I tried to little kind of peek and crawl up underneath there, but I did not see it depart. I did not see it again. That was the total thing was the downward swooping towards me, the flare, and underneath. And the three things that I keep saying the same thing, but the three things that struck me was no red head, trailing white wings, and the strange flight, because I've never seen anything like it. And the only thing I can describe is if you watch a kingfisher when it swoops down off a pole and then comes back up, imagine that but shallower version of that, because it's also bleeding speed. You see the kingfisher's flight approach back from doing an attack on the ground in the water or something is a steeper version of this. But that's the only thing I can liken the flight pattern to. It was very unusual. I've never seen anything like it. I spent a lot of time in the woods. Hunting was my hobby, particularly muzzleloader hunting.
Right.
So anyway, that's
Mathieu. Thank you.
Any questions or?
I want to anchor that and then see if anybody has questions for you. So what Mathieu was describing, again, that's Michael Collins, whom I referred to before, fishcrow.com. And Matthew's testimony about it, look, the kingfisher-like flight, go through Mike Collins's, excuse me, papers, and he makes reference to the only birds that fly like this are the two big, are the pileated, the ivory-bill, and kingfishers. So I think Matthew's testimony all the way around comports with Collins's work, and it's the Pearl River swamp area, the lower Pearl, that's the river that separates Louisiana and Mississippi, and more specifically,
The East Pearl.
Yeah, right. And so more specifically, your sighting was along English Bayou, right, Matthew?
That's correct.
Which is,
Yeah, it was English
a
Bayou,
tributary, and that's where Collins had his sightings too. So it's nice to have the anchoring of that. And with that, if anybody has any questions for Matthew, yeah, it was 2012. It was November of 2012, Matthew.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it was the 24th. I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah, as I recall. I fixed it by taking a couple of pictures along the bayou and a picture of my father, and I kept it in a photo file so it always have the date, so I could recover the date.
That's great.
The camera was in my backpack at the time where it was of no use.
Yeah. Hey, and your point about not saying anything because you're worried about the crowd, trust me, I struggle with that too, but I think now because I think it would be so damaging to the Ivorybills prospects if the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service declares it extinct. I think it's incumbent upon us to offer evidence that the bird isn't extinct. And that's always the issue. Is I get annoyed when people say there have been no sightings. I understand people expect photographs. If you've done the research, though, you know how difficult it would be to get a photograph of an ivory-bill in its habitat. There are very few birders out there or photographers. But B, well, I do think. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Matthew. Go ahead.
I think we should establish different levels of a burden of proof. A burden of proof for being published in a scientific journal that this is absolutely an established fact is one level. That's one burden. Another, to say that it's more likely than not, is more like a civil court matter. Exactly. where it's a preponderance of evidence. And I think the preponderance of evidence can easily be met with this. I think it's more likely the bird exists, maybe not in great numbers, maybe not even sustainable numbers, but I think it's more likely that it does exist than that it does not. Now, can we prove beyond a reasonable doubt? That standard I don't think we've met yet, but for us to have a scientific conclusive proof that it exists, I don't think we've met that yet. But I think the standard that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife is holding us to for deciding that it doesn't exist anymore, that it's extinct, I think it's an unreasonable burden. So that's just my opinion.
Oh, no, I echo your comments. You'll read what Fish and Wildlife Service says is no indisputable records. Well, the indisputable part, I could dispute anything. I could dispute that Queen Elizabeth is the Queen of the UK. So just because someone muddies the waters, that seems to be to meet to dismiss our evidence. And then the other point is we execute people based on eyewitness testimony. You don't, in a murder trial, you don't demand that, well, we can't convict this person of murder because there's no photograph. I don't know why the wild standards have been applied against the ivory-bill, but that's what we're here to try to correct, and we're really here to get, to fight for the ivory-bill and to get a fair hearing for the ivory-bill, which I hope we'll have. Yeah. So Randy asked, are first-hand accounts ever accepted as authoritative by whatever authority accepts the sighting as official, or is a photo mandatory? For example, can a lie detector test substitute for a photo? That's a great question. The answer is, I don't know. They accept all the pre-1944 sightings without cameras, and Jim Tanner himself, who's the great ivory-bill expert, he accepted many site records. So again, I think it's mostly narrative here, and it's strangely applied against a bird that I have no doubt exists. I'm with Matthew in the sense that I have no idea how many ivory-billed woodpeckers exist at the time now, and so whether or not the bird can be saved, whether it's beyond what's called extinction debt, I'm pretty confident it can be. But the point is, we've never done the kind of systematic search to find the Ivorybills throughout their range. I'm looking at another question. Yeah, Richard Price. Seems like all photos are disputable. Lowry's were stuffed, and the Cache River video is not clear enough. Feel like naysayers just want it for themselves. I don't get. Actually, I was going to say I don't take anything personally. I do take it personally when somebody. It's fighting words when somebody accuses George Lowry of being anything other than a saint. That's a bit strong. So we'll might have a whole episode on the Fielding Lewis 1971 photos that Dr. Lowry produced and still get slurred as being a hoax. The jury's out, I would say, but we'll have more to say. But that's a good question. Another one. This is funny. The Mike Collins, I bet that's Britain. But anyhow, Mike Collins fly under video is better than Linode. That's absolutely true. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't even acknowledge the video. What the heck is that flying? A turkey, LOL? Well, actually, in their so the way this works legally is you have a bird listed on an animal listed on the endangered species under the Endangered Species Act. Fish and Wildlife has to do a 5-year review, and the latest 5-year review, they did review Collins, but all it said they were blurry photographs. There's blurry images. There's no analysis of it, and I know that they didn't. The woman who drafted it, Amy Trahan, did not speak to Mike Collins. She didn't ask Dr. Collins, PhD in mathematics, anything about his what I think to be brilliant analysis. In the fly under video, I think that's his best work. The other ones I think are also good. They just take more explanations. But the fly under video, in my opinion, is clearly an ivory-billed woodpecker. So looking through the chats. While we're sort of, and Matthew and Thomas, I really wanted to thank you. And John Williams, I think we'll save your testimony to when you give a longer discussion on field methods. So that John Williams sometime will do that.
Yeah, Matt, I have a question for Matthew.
Sure. Thomas Matthew, right?
Or
Matthew Dell. I'm sorry. I'm still on cold medicine here. Go ahead.
Well,
John.
you and Thomas work together, as I understand it.
Yes.
I have a question for Matthew, Mr. Dell. Have you been back to that area much since? Is it an area that you frequent? In other words, have you had a lot of other time in that area where you haven't encountered the Ivorybill? And do you happen to know other people that go in there that you might be able to convince to have some kind of a search methodology? Because if I'm not mistaken, I think Mike Collins has had a report or had some kind of an auditory encounter within the last year, right, Matt? Isn't that true?
Well, I'm not going to speak for Mike. He's had encounters subsequent to the ones he's published. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so Matthew,
I've been there a few times after that, but no, I moved away out of state for quite a while, and my father's aging, so it was a father-son thing that we hunted together, and we're not doing that as much anymore. It's more problematic, but I would be willing to go back there, and I would like to. In fact, that's actually why I got hooked up with Matt Cortman was I was contacting him saying that I would like to go back there and be involved in that. So yes, that part, yes. Now I understood, but we ought to probably get Mike Collins involved to speak for himself, but I've heard that he has been back there and that he has had encounters. So
right.
To answer that part, I think there are activities going there.
I'll just speak to that. Mike and I have been there recently together, and so I'm just saying he's not out of it. I'll say this, and I've tried to get Mike to come on, and honestly, this is my opinion. Hopefully Mike will be able to say it more. I think he doesn't really want to engage in the back and forth because it's been so nasty with him. I've probably crossed the Rubicon. I can be friends with birders, or I can advocate for the Ivorybill. It's a strange situation to me. I'm a very friendly guy. I love people. I've been involved in birding my whole life, but there's such a certitude that the Ivorybill is extinct among birding circles that you're treated as if you have 3 heads and you've accused these great authorities of not being correct. all I'm here to say is, and Thomas and I have talked about this, that, and I'm thrilled that Matthew's given his testimony, and John would speak up too, is maybe because I'm not a professional biologist, I don't really have to toe any company line. I can just tell you what I saw. I'm happy to answer questions, and if people think I'm lying or incompetent, that's their judgment. But thank you so much for that, Matthew.
I agree with you, and the thing is, it shouldn't be personal. I probably would be in any other camp had I not seen it personally. Had I not seen what I saw and been shocked by it, I would be in the other camp. So I have a little empathy for them, and so many things in my whole life have been not personal. It's just business. It's
Right.
like how I live my life. So I don't have an axe to grind for or against anybody who agrees or disagrees with me. So
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, Judy asked Luneau. That's L-U-N-E-U. So Judy, in the excuse me, in 2005, sort of this. So 2004 and 2005 in Arkansas, we'll just call that the Cornell, Arkansas event. 2004, it was Gene Sparling was a kayaker, and he posted on a kayaking forum that he'd seen what he thought was an Ivorybill, and ultimately, I think through Mary Scott, that got from the kayaking forum to Tim Gallagher. I think at Cornell discovered it, and so Tim Gallagher and Bobby Harrison followed up. That led to Cornell getting interested and organizing, along with the Nature Conservancy and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other interested partnerships. I think it was called the Big Wood Partnership. So in 2004 and 2005, there was quite an effort, which the United States Fish and Wildlife Service found. That's why it's so odd and discouraging that now they claim that there have been no sightings since 1944. But the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service accepted the evidence proffered by Cornell, and central to the evidence was the Luneau video, L-U-N-E-A-U, which actually was an interesting story. And I think that's close. That's when I was, it's a close call. I don't really spend much time on videos and trying to analyze it. But the argument is an argument as to whether or not the bird captured in the Luneau video is an ivory-billed woodpecker. I just wanted to add a quick inside baseball comment about that. So my friend Guy Luneau, who's written a great book about the ivorybill, for which I wrote the foreword, where he publishes his photos, which is trail cam analysis, which I think is an excellent explanation of why he's captured that there's an ivorybill in that photo. Anyway, so Guy is David's brother. So David did the video that Cornell proffered as evidence that the ivorybill was extant in 2004 and 5. So David's video, I think it was from 2005. At any rate, so what happened that day on Bayou de View was David, who is an accomplished birder, was with his brother-in-law in a canoe, and the brother-in-law was not an accomplished birder, but David, being very mechanical, I think he's an engineering professor, David had rigged up a camera, which was a video camera, which was continuously running. So as they were paddling through Bayou de View, the brother-in-law in the bow says, "Hey, there it goes." And David looked up and never saw the bird. And then that night, David thought, "Hey, I wonder if I captured it on video." So he did, in fact, and Google it. It's easy to find the Luneau, L-U-N-E-A-U, ivorybill video. It's the centerpiece of Cornell's presentation. However, I think it's somewhat of an albatross around their neck, because there were 7 sightings by very competent observers of the ivorybill. So I think irrespective of the Luneau videos, whether or not it shows an ivorybill or a pileated, that's unimportant. I think the 7 eyewitness testimonies plus the audio evidence, in my opinion, is clearly an ivory-billed woodpecker. Want to look through the chat. Judy said, yeah, Judy, I agree with you. Judy expressed the toxic environment. It's so hard to get an actual discussion about this. And again, I'm just going to tell you what I know, and I could be asking the wrong people. Chuck Hunter has always been very helpful with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Chuck's done great jobs. Other than that, I can't get anybody to return my emails or texts. They seem to have gone dark. in my opinion, is, again, just my opinion, and I hope to get, I really want to get someone from Fish and Wildlife Service on here, but it seems to be a bureaucratic thing rather than a scientific thing based on a previously expressed desire to delist 30 birds a year. And as the lawyer, or even as Sherlock Holmes and the dog that didn't bark, you have to ask yourself why the Eskimo curlew, of which we have almost zero sightings that I know of, as opposed to the Ivory-billed, which we have a lot of sightings of. The Eskimo curlew is not on the extinct list from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I'm not saying that's a nefarious reason. I'm just saying that's a curious issue. But back to the toxicity, I've presented before many ornithologists who've talked about they're not going to take a step. They won't say whether or not they've seen an Ivory-bill because of the abuse they'll get from the ornithological world. And again, that's been my experience. People tell me not to say you've seen it. Sounds like you're crazy. I mean, do I have an option to not report having seen it? I just don't think that's very good science. Again, just because I said I've seen it doesn't mean you have to accept it. But if it were a court of law, you know, here I am, cross-examine me anytime you want. Any other questions? Because we're heading up on the hour and 15 mark. I don't want to keep, I really enjoyed everything.
I wanted to say one more thing to Mr. Hurleman, who's here. Thank you, Dean, for sending me that beautiful Ivory-bill object that you did. I never got a chance in person to say thank you, so thank you.
And I wanted to add on, this is the nice thing about the community. Having now gotten steeped into the Ivory-bill wars, if we only have 300,000 Americans who are interested in preserving the Ivory-bill, I think our goal is to rally the 300,000 Americans, and that's what we're trying to do through this series. Because I think so many people are brainwashed. I'll come up with a better term than that. How about the Dunning-Kruger effect? I'm just kidding. I'm not kidding. I think what happens is people read something. I'll have people we have magnets on our van about the Ivory-billed woodpecker, and very well-meaning people, and of course they are, they'll say, oh, the Ivory-bill's extinct. I said, how do you know that? I read about it. And then you ask, well, the article you read, did they talk about the 1937 article from Allen? At any rate, I go on, but the Dunning-Kruger effect suggests that once you learn a little something about it, then you think you know everything. And I think I'm going to start calling myself the king of questions or the emperor of ignorance, because I don't want to lead from a position of ego. I've had to unlearn much of what I thought I knew about the Ivory-billed woodpecker. So I am, the king of questions. I obviously have my own strong opinions about what I think I've learned, and I'm prepared to back that up. But what's frustrating to me is the overstatement of what we think we know about the Ivory-bill, and it really tamps down the science. So again, I'm always leading with the questions, and thrilled to have these kind of conversations, because I've learned just looking at John and Thomas. I've learned so much from John's scientific background, and Thomas is just an ace hunter. He's really helped me. So, and honestly, we're on the good side in the sense that I'm never talking anymore. I will be pretty blunt about people's manufactured ignorance. In other words, they will read one article and then you point out, well, that article is quite in the minority of opinion on the subject, and they won't look at the other ones. So it's a fine line, but we're in this for the long haul, and we're here to advocate for the Ivory-bill. And if that just means searching for the truth, and part of the searching for the truth is being wrong. So in other words, you have to be bold about this. And John and I've talked about this. We'll have set a few hypotheses, and I love when you reject a certain hypothesis, because negative information is getting you closer to the target. So we really appreciate everyone who's here, and please keep spreading the word, because we want to have these kind of in-depth talks.
Matt, I actually have another question while I think of it.
Good.
Which is sort of like my mantra lately. You guys really can't go out in the woods and search in January? It's that different with the hunting pressure?
There are two answers. One is I don't want to get killed. No, I'm just kidding.
But
that's a serious point. But two is we don't want to alienate hunters. I absolutely am going to kayak throughout January just because that won't interfere with anyone. And there are areas, excuse me, where there aren't hunters. I just am loath to bring in people from all across the country during deer season in Louisiana for that reason. So
Yeah,
hunters are our allies, actually.
If you walk up on someone who's gone to the trouble to go out there and set up at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and you accidentally stumble up on them and you've ruined their hunt for the day, I could see someone getting pretty irate over that.
I hear you.
Yeah. So the answer is we will absolutely search through deer season, but with very low impact, either on private land or by kayak. But I would say, go ahead, John.
I get it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm willing to carry a flintlock out there and also a camera, you know?
Yeah, actually, when you say that, Matthew, Jeffrey Hill made a really great comment. He said, actually, if we were hunting with shotguns, it'd be a lot easier to get evidence than with a camera. And I think that's probably true. And again, I'm always, when we talk about our reward, I'm always very clear to say, don't disturb the bird. And I would be, and many of you know the story, but the rediscovery in 1932 was Mason Spencer, a legislator from Tallulah, Louisiana, killing an ivory-bill and bringing it to the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. Here's your proof. We certainly don't want that to happen. Anybody want to unmute themselves and ask questions while Lauren and I look through the chat?
Yeah, I actually had something to add, Matt.
Yeah, hey, Derek.
Hey, so I actually did an interview with Matt. We posted on our channel, Badgerland Birding, and at the end we talk about, if anyone has any evidence or sightings to reach out to us. I actually had someone reach out to me who goes and birds in the 𝗥𝗘𝗔𝗟𝗟𝗬, where Jeff Hill has previously been. And so he apparently goes out there for like 2 weeks every year camping just to look for Ivory-bills. And so he's apparently said he's had sightings when he's gone out there, and he's planning on doing it again this year. So I told him to stay in touch, and it sounds like he's doing good stuff. But, people are out there in that area looking, which is cool because I actually emailed Jeff and asked if anyone had been back, and he said he didn't think so. So apparently there are people out there looking, so it's positive stuff. I'm going to post the link to the interview we did with Matt in the comments if you guys want to look. He talks about his sightings, similar to what we talked about today, but a lot of other stuff too.
Thanks, Derek. And I want to plug Derek. Derek's a graduate student at Nicholls State, and he and his brother have a fantastic YouTube channel, called Badgerland Birding. And Derek really, Lauren and I ultimately, our real mission is to get kids interested in nature. So the Ivory-bill was my spark species. Lauren's was the Siberian tiger. But while documenting the Ivory-bill is very important to us, the global effort is to get people interested in nature. And I just wanted to say what a great job Derek and his brother do of bringing the adventure part of birding in. And I think y'all do. You're right on. I really appreciate you. Any other questions? Unmute yourself or comments. Thanks for all their sweet comments. Yep, the numbers are growing, and Derek posted that. Yeah, great. And if you have, I think in general, if y'all find people who want to come on and have short testimonies, that would help, just because, again, I got to say, we're here to answer questions, but the other side, good luck getting somebody from Fish and Wildlife Service to answer your questions. And again, I know that sounds harsh, and that's just been my experience, but a lot of the journalists I've talked to are having problems too. And I would really, really like to retract that and say, oh, I talked to so-and-so at Fish and Wildlife Service, and they were very forthcoming. But I think that's the state of it. If there are no other questions, we'll start shutting down, but please visit us. We'll be putting our webpage up soon, but Mission Ivory-bill on Facebook, and we'll always use the same Zoom for 7 o'clock on Central. Please bring friends, and I'd love to have skeptics, because they might teach us something. Maybe they know something I don't. Unfortunately, I almost never find that. So if there are no other questions, we'll say goodnight. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate you. Thomas and Matthew, particularly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it. All right. Well, we'll see you next Monday, and we'll have something fun and interesting. Please bring more people. Love y'all. Thanks. Good night.